with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
Yeah, what's up, world? Welcome to episode 105 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Geechee y'all joining us in the co-pilot seat. Welcome everybody back to Black Liberation Media. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, put this in your socials, make sure you drop comments, do all the things to support the algorithm. Greetings, comrades. And including those in the undefeated chat. The all-stars are already in the building. Good morning.
I feel like maybe Geechee might be little sister in me a little bit. Like it's been a while since you've been here. It's just as you're on, I'm like, wait a minute.
And then showed up just as we got started like a true diva. So,
Look, but the face is glistening. We're freshly...
Hey, listen, man. I'm having a hard time here, man. I'm having a hard time. A lot of stuff going on.
I feel like there's always a lot of stuff going on.
Dr. Winkler in the building.
Yo.
Can I just quickly say, shout out to Dr. Winkler. I owe you, Dr. Winkler. He has made me a very nice, supportive offer to help me with one of these personality tests. My closest homeboy said I should take it. Oh, and nice. I just keep no good reason. I'm fronting, so I apologize. I do intend to do it, but anyway, good to see Dr. Winkler.
I meant to check in with him and see how the Race First conference went. Him and Baba Imhotep down there, and on the flyer they got Harrison on the flyer, so that's
interesting.
Yeah, I want to see how that went.
That's very interesting.
Wait, is this person is this a hate watcher?
More nonsense from the fake anti-capitalists. I don't know.
No. Okay.
Once again, might be on their way out once again. But look, listen. I'm really getting to the point. I saw Dr. Fatima say it on her show, and I'm like, I'm not, if you don't put a name and a face and support the Patreon, I'm not even responding to you. She's like, I'm not even dealing with goofies in the chat, in the comment that come up here anonymously hating. So she was like, you got to be a member of my Patreon if you want to hear from me. So
maybe they're not anonymous. Maybe Brittany is right. Maybe it's Brittany is right and it's Cuddly Mike.
Oh, I would love it.
All right, so we have a limited time with our first guest, and Brian's gonna come on shortly and join the conversation. But BAP has kicked off a new campaign, and so we wanted to bring some of the BAP comrades on to talk about what's going on with this month of action and to let folks know what's going on for today. So JAB, you got the buttons.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Good morning.
So thank you. If you both want to just quickly, and Frames, we can start with you, like just quickly introduce yourself. And then Haley, you can introduce yourself, and then you can just give the people what they need. And then we can, if we have time, we'll ask some questions.
Yeah, sounds good. Peace, y'all. Good morning. Thanks for having us on. I'm Frames. I'm with the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team. I'm also with the Black Socialist Formation, based here over in Pittsburgh. And happy to be here. Also, I just wanted to mention I'm new to this show specifically, but our formation over here in Pittsburgh, we run a study group monthly, and we actually used y'all's episode on North Korea and Notital with Jamie, and I think Musa was on there. We used that as the material for last month's study. So really appreciate being able to be on here with y'all this morning.
That's dope. Thank you.
Peace, everyone. Apologies in advance for my audio. I know that it's not the best this morning, but I'll do the best I can. And if I need to speak up, just let me know. But yeah, my name is Hallie. I'm also a member of Black Alliance for Peace. I'm also on the Africa team and have been working, with Frames and other members of the Africa team on getting ready for the month of action against AFRICOM this October. So that's what we're here to talk about this morning. I'm also a longtime watcher of the channel, so it's exciting to be on, and it was exciting to be on Thursday too. So thanks for having us.
Fantastic. So do you want to talk about, why don't we talk about the actual month of action first, so people have some sense of like what that's all about, and then we can talk about the kickoff that's going on today.
Yeah, sounds good. I can start us off. As you just mentioned, we're right now in the beginning of the International Month of Action Against AFRICOM as part of BAP's U.S. Out of Africa campaign. So every October, this is the 5th one so far, and every October we organize around raising the public consciousness around the existence of AFRICOM, which is the United States Africa Command. So the Africa Command, AFRICOM, is one of 11 military combatant commands that the U.S. has around the globe. This one specifically focused on the continent of Africa, and it describes all of the U.S. military, functions, operations, basically the military presence on the continent of Africa. And we focus on AFRICOM because it's through this, the employment of this militarism by the United States, that the U.S. and the rest of the West as well benefits from this. But it's through this that the U.S. is able to maintain a certain level of instability around the continent, and in doing that, continuing and maintaining this dynamic between the U.S. and the West and Africa and African nations, keeping African nations from sovereignty, from self-determination, keeping them militarily dependent on the United States. This facilitates the capitalist class ability to continue to exploit Africa, exploit African people, African resources, African land. And so, we call for an end to AFRICOM, removal of the U.S. military presence on the continent, because while AFRICOM might claim to be on the continent to support Africa and Africans against threats of, what is often simplified and reduced to terrorism, against threats of Salafist jihadists violence on the continent and other forms of military support. Truthfully, we understand that the true goal of AFRICOM is to keep Africa dependent on the U.S., on the West, and to maintain the same systems that allow the continued colonization of the continent and of our people.
I think Frames raised some really good points there, a few of them. So for one, he was mentioning how, a lot of the time the justification that we hear for, why AFRICOM is necessary is that, it's important or crucial to combating terrorism on the continent. But, by the Pentagon's own, studies, like one came out in 2019, the presence of AFRICOM has led to like a dramatic increase in like Islamist and other fundamentalist kind of violent groups. And so we kind of understand that there's kind of this dynamic of security dependency that they kind of tout as like the reason that AFRICOM needs to exist. But in reality, it's kind of this never-ending cycle of like destabilization, through the presence of the U.S. and, the kind of neoliberal, policies and orders that they enforce, kind of making life, unlivable, pushing people to seek political alternatives, just not having sovereignty in their own nations. And then, it's kind of the U.S. always being like, oh, well, this is a mess and we need to clean it up. But it's like, you're kind of responsible in the first place, not to mention like just the long history of colonialism, but specifically the presence of AFRICOM has led to a big spike in just what is being referred to as terrorism on the continent. And another thing that I think is important to know about AFRICOM is that its conceptual origin kind of dates back to the very early 2000s. So in 2003 and in 2002. So there was kind of a white paper put out by the Heritage Foundation, which many of us are kind of learning about through like Project 2025. It's sort of infamy through Project 2025, but the Heritage Foundation in 2003 published a paper kind of pushing for the establishment of AFRICOM. And so for people who aren't familiar, the Heritage Foundation is like an arch-conservative think tank. And then a few months before that, in 2002, there's a Zionist organization, also a Zionist think tank called the Institute for Advanced Strategic and Political Studies, who also recommended that the US establish a regional subcommand in Africa before it existed. In their report, African Oil, a Priority for US National Security and African Development. And so these two arch-conservative think tanks are kind of the conceptual origin of AFRICOM. And then a few years later in 2007, the DoD kind of came to a decision to actually go ahead and implement that under Bush. And then, you know, it really took off under Obama. So those are the kinds of origins that we're talking about when we're talking about AFRICOM.
Thank you. And I, you know, when we do, because the Newark team now, I think, has always done something during the month of action. So that's a reminder that I need to ping Dennis and find out what we're doing this month. But one of the things I think for me, and I've had Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, like on a desk for a really long time. And it was in prepping for the month of action that I whipped it out and started like reading. Yep, exactly. See, there we go. Started reading, and there's just so much that gets overlooked whenever we start talking about imperialism and colonialism and this idea that like the West needs to save Africa from itself, right? Like that, like this like wild idea that the West has to go in and take over on this massive amount of land with a massive amount of people and tell them all what to do to make sure that they get themselves together when ain't nothing together in the West. It's a hot mess over here. We're like, I can't. But I do encourage folks, if you can, to tap in and, you know, follow what's going on with the month of action. Typically, there are things that are happening in multiple places. But what my point really is, for me, it was even an opportunity for me to kind of get some more grounding in the history and understanding of how these things come to be, because as always, it never fails. Like the story that you're told by the mainstream narrative here has very little to do with the realities of what's happening on the continent. And so it's always a good idea to tap in where you can. So is there anything else that you all want to mention about the month of action itself before we talk about today's kickoff?
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Appreciate it, and really appreciate your point too about how it's just a great way to, you know, tap into. It's really a great idea to tap in to the month of action and as a way of learning more about neocolonialism in general. Hallie was talking about the Heritage Foundation connection and kind of the conceptual origins of AFRICOM specifically. But in that same vein, you know, building on that, it's really important to understand that AFRICOM exists in the context of historical, you know, exploitation of the continent. When we understand colonialism, another way in which we're miseducated is understanding colonization and slavery and all of the things that's existing in these finite periods of time and things that are done and over with and in the past. But it's really important to understand that this exists on a continuum, right? This is a dynamic that is everlasting and has been existing throughout, you know, the past centuries. And while it changes and it shifts, it's still important to understand that this is still a colonial dynamic between, you know, Africans in the West. And it's something that having that framework is really useful for understanding how we engage in a struggle for our liberation and a struggle for our sovereignty. So I think just we'd like to share maybe the demands from the Africa team related to the month of action, which are: one, the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Africa. 2, the demilitarization of the African continent. 3, the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world. And 4, that the Congressional Black Caucus opposes the U.S. Africa Command and conduct hearings on AFRICOM's impact on the African continent with the full participation of members of U.S. and African civil society. So those are the 4, articulated demands of the month of action. And we ask that folks get involved. We have a toolkit that we put out from the Africa team that's full of great suggestions on how you might get involved, where you're at in organizing against AFRICOM. This involves, hosting teach-ins, which, the toolkit has some great guidance around, which is for me also something that helped me learn a lot more on my own. It prompted me to do a lot of study. So, the teaching guide is really useful. Some more information along the lines of what Hallie was sharing earlier around the origins of AFRICOM and also what AFRICOM's true purpose is, ways to engage online, ways to engage in forms of direct action. So all kinds of things like that you can find in the toolkit. And yeah, Hallie, did you want to, anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, all that, I think you kind of captured a lot of what I was also hoping to say. I think another thing that we just were able to mention on Thursday that people might not know about AFRICOM that I think is, newer information to some of us, even on the Africa team, is this National Guard State Partnership Program that is involved with AFRICOM. So basically there is a state partnership program with the U.S. National Guard that pairs, state and territory level National Guards with 50% of the world's country. And, I think someone brought up, so I mentioned this on Thursday when we were on the Remix Morning Show, and someone in the comments, so maybe if you're here, someone in the comments asked, I looked this up and it looked like, they were just interested in doing disaster relief or, having that kind of available for disaster relief purposes. But an example of like how that, maybe that's what they say, but when that isn't the case. So in Rhode Island last year, we were planning some teach-ins and found out that there had just been like a Rhode Island National Guard deployment to the Horn of Africa to like do aircraft maintenance and like cybersecurity stuff. So when we talk about how like, this is like local as well, especially with the National Guard kind of being, sent to terrorize people in U.S. cities right now. Those connections are really clear, and so you can look up if your state is partnered with AFRICOM. I think there are 16 U.S. states currently partnered, so like Kenya and like Massachusetts, which sounds so ridiculous, but they have a partnership, New York and South Africa. So that's maybe one way to kind of tap in and see what's going on, or if there's like a direct action that might come out of something like that. I think the last thing that we wanted to do was just plug today's webinar. So today is the kickoff webinar for the month of action. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And so it'll be about an hour and a half. And you can tune in and you can find the registration information on BAP's website. And yeah, I think that's about it, Frames.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned that National Guard connection, and it reminded me of just, I think, a really important thing, which is just that part of what's really important for us here as Africans outside the continent right now, wherever we may be around the globe, is that the struggle against AFRICOM, against imperialism, Western imperialism, U.S. imperialism on the continent, is significant to all of us as Africans, no matter where we are, right? Because it's also connected to the way the U.S. weaponizes violence against us, uses its militarization, employs militarization against us, right, to deny us our liberties and our sovereignty here where we stand in our neighborhoods here, right? So you can make a direct connection between AFRICOM, the U.S. military presence on the continent, and police in our own communities here. And, it's a very similar or the same function, a very related function that's being carried out in our neighborhoods. And just like Hallie mentioned, like we're seeing in recent examples, not just the police, but the National Guard itself, right, being deployed in our communities to police us, to keep us in these conditions that are violent, and that keep us exploitable. So just it's really important to make those connections as well when we engage in this month of action. Is we are struggling for liberation for Africans all around the globe, wherever we are, and it's important to make those connections and understand it as an internationalist struggle.
Personally, I don't see what the big problem is, given that the first leader of AFRICOM is a Morgan State grad. I just feel like, you know, HBCUs, you know what I mean? You know,
you always come with that.
how can we be complaining about this when a black man led this effort, a Morgan State? You know,
I mean, well, that kind of gives us an opportunity to talk about this year's theme, which is 21st century neocolonialism, capitalism, compradors, and the ongoing scramble for Africa. And so, you know, something that we pay attention to in BAP and try to draw attention to is, you know, when Black folks are used to do kind of the bidding or are, you know, the face of, you know, these programs like AFRICOM, or right now, a great example is, you know, Kenya's role in the kind of, you know, Western supported like occupation of Haiti. And, you know, that has led to them becoming, oh, what's the designation? We were joking that it was like, you know, elite employee, but like, oh, major non-NATO ally, the newest major non-NATO ally of the US. You know, and so we try to kind of pay attention and show. I mean, Michael Langley is Black, and he's the commander of AFRICOM. So we try to draw attention to, you know, when there's Black misleadership, or when, you know, Black faces in high places are kind of used to cover over the reality, the intentions, and, you know, the violence kind of being enacted on Africans by saying, well, you know, we have Black people who are supporting this. Well, you know, we're saying they're not aligned with the majority, or they're not working, you know, in the best interests of Africans, even if they might be Black themselves.
Right on. Again, the links are in the show description, so you can register and join the webinar immediately following today's show.
So I just dropped the link in the chat too. So
right on.
To it. But that's, I mean, thank you, Haley. I understand you actually have to get going because you're in charge of one of these watch parties. I'm going to be tuning in from the car because I'll be driving to Pennsylvania as the watch party's happening. But I do seriously encourage, even if folks can't join the watch parties, can't watch it live at 1, that's why we record these things so that you can circle back and listen to it later. Definitely tap in. Frames, Haley, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything you want to end with to wrap, or anything?
No, not really on my end. Thank you for having us. Like Frame said, check out the toolkit, and if you're interested to plan an action or a teach-in, or tune in today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Right on. Thank you for joining us and for the work. Appreciate you.
All right, take care. Thank you.
All right. Peace, 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 peace.
Peace, y'all.
And I think Brian's ready.
Yep. Looks like it. So we can just keep it moving. Folks, make sure you like, share, subscribe, put this in the social, support the Patreon, and make sure you have the bell rung so you don't miss all the good stuff happening on Black Liberation Media. And Dr. Kwoba, welcome back.
Nope, you muted.
Oh,
don't forget.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We got you. We got you.
Thank you. It's great to be back, especially with special guest Geechee, who I got to spend some good quality time with this past week as I was visiting Atlanta.
I know. I'm jealous that Geechee was able to get it together first. We're gonna have to wait until like February for Brian to come to Jersey, but I'm gonna make it happen. My whole scheme is going. We're gonna get Brian to Jersey, and we're gonna do a whole thing. So
let's do it.
Keep the eyes open. All right. So before we get started, I have a story. Jared had a story last week. I have a story this week. But Jared, there's a link to a Google sheet. Well, actually, it's a Google Doc, actually, with some pictures, because I want people to understand how problematic this whole like trying to organize thing is when folks just not on the same page. So, as everyone is aware, I'm in multiple organizations, all with the intense intention of trying to, achieve liberation, which I seriously, like, the likelihood of it happening in my lifetime is like 0 to none. But the goal here is, if you fight, keep fighting, because giving up is not actually an option either. So this thing happens in Chicago. If for folks who are unaware, the Black Hawk helicopters dropped in ICE and federal agents, and they locked down an entire building, was pulling babies out in the middle of the night, zip tying babies. Whoever was in the building got pulled out. It was a disaster. Now, for folks who are unaware, right, like, this is not exactly like new in this country. It just, I think because we're in these really intense times where people are watching things and the media is talking about stuff. Like, I think people see things and they're like, oh my God, these helicopters, what did it say? And I don't think people understand that, like, in 1985, the helicopters swarmed over Philadelphia and dropped a bomb on a city building. And so, like, these things are not, it's not fully unique, right? Anywho, so in one of my group chats for one of the organizations I'm a part of, someone wrote a thing to discuss what happened in Chicago and to basically say, listen, when they stormed this building, they weren't trying to separate Black folks, right? They weren't trying to figure out, like, who had figured out their line of ancestry and who came from somewhere else and who was whatever generation in the US or whatever have you. So we have to find a way as Black folks to work together against our united oppression. So this got a response from one of these FBA people who's part of the group. And I'm not going to name names. I've blocked out the group. I've blocked out the name of the person, because it's not really about the organization. It's about how this person responded to the whole thing. Because I'm really trying to navigate, like, when you're in a space that's supposed to be about organizing towards our freedom and our liberation, to have other people talk to me in ways that even white folks don't really talk to me. Like, one has to wonder, how does this work, right? Like, how do we manage being in these spaces with people who think this type of reaction to other Black people is appropriate? So the person was on this whole thing about how the group is full of shit, basically. And, like, folks should have went to Chicago to talk to the people on the ground and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so, admittedly, I was being snarky when I asked the question that I asked, because I think there's like one person in this entire group chat who actually lives in Illinois. And I don't even know if that person lives in Chicago. But the person that was being addressed with this diatribe about how nobody's doing anything and it's all talk and blah, 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 does not live in Chicago, does not live in Illinois. The person who is writing this also does not live in Chicago and does not live in Illinois. So I posed the question of, well, did you go to Chicago to, like, be on the ground to talk to people? Because I was trying to make the point of, you live in another state. You didn't go to Chicago. The person you're addressing lives in another state and did not go to Chicago. So I don't even know why we're having this, like, weird conversation about people should have gone to Chicago and we need to be on the ground and blah, 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 blah. So, Jared, can you pull up can you pull it up, the Google sheet? Because I want y'all to see the reaction that my question of, did you go to Chicago to be on the ground, got. So, and I don't even want to read the whole thing, but we start with the whole caps back and forth. He's been doing this before I was even born, 40 years before. I just want to remind everybody I'm almost 50. So he also doesn't know who I am. He's got more grassroots in his pinky than I have in my whole body. I'm disrespectful. He's twice my age, right? Okay. Now I will admit that once we start doing this, I'm not good. Like, I'm not a good person in these types of situations. I like struggle because I'm trying to figure out how do I navigate responding in a way that's not going to make this worse, right? It didn't work, by the way. So he keeps going. Now I'm a Oprah Winfrey, color purple propaganda. I'm a misandrist, which I gotta say, I had to look up misandrist because I was like, what the hell does this mean? Like, what is this word? So I apparently hate men also, FYI. Then he calls me a tether, which is like the new disrespectful term, I guess, for people who are children of people who aren't from the US. And so this is where my snark comes in, because as someone just said in the chat, I was like, damn, you're 98? That's dope. You look great for your age. Now, admittedly, I was being an asshole now, because at this point, you're talking to me. All I did was ask one question. I literally asked one question. This was the response that came back to me. Then we went on to all of this. I'm fake. I'm whack. I'm a cornball. Right? Like, all of this coming because of the one question, right? So then he goes on to explain that, that he's got an FBI file. And now we get into the whole Negropean, which I guess this is the new term when you're not from the US. Then he goes on, and this is where I'm like, now you've lost your mind. Because now he's calling me the N-word. Now, all of this, y'all saw, I've had very little response, right? I'm goofy, but I'm the disrespectful one.
To be fair, he put the number 1 in there instead of an I.
Okay. Right? So all of this. And he's thanking me for expressing thoughts, right? Which I didn't express because I actually said nothing, right? And then he's telling me he's got smoke for me. He's gonna he's nuking words, blah, 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 blah.
And he said he's an elder.
Yeah. And so clearly I've triggered this person, right? Like, at this point, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna be done. So someone else steps in to try to help. And then so now he's responding to this other person with this last one to again call me disrespectful, right? I'm the disrespectful one. All this, I'm an ungrateful, the Negropean, still with the N-bombs, all of this. Okay. So my question, and the reason I found that I decided to do this publicly in this way for this conversation is because Hubert Harrison was all about pan-Africanism. We all going to work together towards us, our liberation. That was Marcus Garvey.
But they're both tethers.
Right. Tethers. And then all of for me, I think for me, the thing that was the most bothersome is I'm like, you did all of that. Right. And that's literally the thread. I didn't pull anything that I wrote out. I said very little. Now, admittedly, I did laugh at the person because once you start showing me that you're a little off and you're unhinged, all I can do is laugh and be like, you're wildin', but okay. But I just real quick, I wanted to put it out there because I don't know how we organize in spaces with people who behave like this and who respond to other Black people like this in what's supposed to be our safe space because we're working together as Black people. How does that work?
So if I can't, I just wanted to share this quote that I sent you all earlier from this dissertation that was published 2 years ago at University of Pennsylvania, UPenn at University of Pennsylvania, and we'll be hearing more from the author forthcoming. I have been in touch, and actually we had been in touch some time ago, but anyway, the to your question though, the thesis of this dissertation about ADOS is and the online reparations discourse. One of the arguments that it makes is that they're having an increasingly negative impact in what are supposed to be the Black political spaces that you're talking about. And this one quote, I think so far summarizes it very nicely. The author writes, "It appears at turns, that is ADOS, appears at turns as a movement or a charitable organization or an influence campaign because because these are the forms by which it can be valued in contemporary capitalism. The movement, the organization, and the influence campaign represent specific methods of organization in Black politics, but all have relied on a unified conception of blackness as a substance of resistance to white supremacy. ADOS, by definition, rejects this unification and rejects pan-Africanism specifically in favor of a blackness as a collection of data points, a network of people with lineage that can be authenticated, quantitative variances in life chances that can be measured, and a calculable value that, if redeemed, would in effect dissolve blackness in the solution of Americanness," end quote. And I just think that summarizes their impact perfectly. And what you're demonstrating and experiencing here is exactly the point, that would be the reaction and the behavior in a nominally all Black space, which is operating for the purposes of Black liberation, is exactly what many of us critics have been pointing to for a long time now is an apparent goal of this entity. And then this dissertation does a lot to uncover the history of the organization. Again, as I've been talking about elsewhere, the white supremacist political foundations that it rests upon. And so, yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, but.
So, I think I've mentioned this before, that in passing, I always heard John Henry Clark talk about ego starvation and how he was gonna eventually write about it or something like that, but I think I never found it. And then what I posted the other day, in this book, in Brian's book, Harrison is in conversation with J.A. Rogers, and it actually laid out, I guess, things that made me focus more on like what John Henry Clark possibly was saying. And so again, this can go with leadership in the organization or just simple people, like why we are joining organizations, and our constant state of ego starvation kind of allows us to like get in these organizations and not really work on ourselves while we're in the organization. So the quote that Brian has in the book was, big Negroes, namely, don't help to push other Negroes into notice. If you have one notice yourself, notice for them detracts from your notice. Black people often seek to counter their oppression by being somebody, and therefore feel, even if only subconsciously, that by giving credit where credit is due to other Black people, their own somebodyness will diminish. So when that dude is posturing all this bullshit, like I just gonna see that. And so unfortunately, like in spaces that we are in, like people like that actually move up to leadership in these organizations. And so imagine what that would feel like if that motherfucker was a leader as opposed to just some other person in the chat. So
old is not elder.
And the whole, once somebody starts off by saying something like, I've been doing this 40 years, longer than you've been alive, I already know you don't even know who you're talking to. Like, you're doing all of this. I'm 49 years old. So if he's doing this longer, like, your math is off because he's already made a bad assumption. He has no idea what my thoughts are. He doesn't know what my beliefs are on reparations. We've never had any of these conversations. But I'll say, in our previous meeting, I did snap at him because he called somebody out because they were descendants of Nigerians. And I was like, why are you doing, like, don't do that. Like, this is not the time or the space for this. I don't know what's going on, but like, my family's Jamaican. And if you said to me what you just said to that young person, I would snap. So can we like relax with all of this? So in the end, what really happened is I had previously triggered him by asking him not to be disrespectful. And so my one question set off a whole series of explosions in his head, apparently, because, you know, my audacity, you know, as someone whose family isn't from here, to speak to him and to question him and to check him for his bullshit. Right. And I don't really have time for other people's bullshit. Like, in the end, like, I don't have time for it. Like, we have, like, people are dying. They're dropping military people in the middle of cities. Like, who has time to be carrying on with people about nonsensical conversations about whether or not you can track your lineage? Like, do you know how many people can't track their lineage, even if they are descendants of chattel slavery? Like, can we focus, right? Like, can we focus? And I really, you know, I seem to be triggering a lot of people. I triggered a white girl 2 weeks ago. Now I'm triggering FBA. And in the end, I just want people to pay attention to, like, the things that are happening that are actually problematic in our lives, right? Because there's not a cop on this earth who decides that they're going to come after a Black person who is going to stop and ask them what their lineage is first before they make the decision on what they're going to do next. That's literally not a thing. It's
yeah,
not.
I mean,
Go ahead, Brian.
Absolutely. I mean, this is where I would offer some of the most profound teachings or perspectives on reparations that I have encountered. When I was in the UK doing my doctoral degree, I met a woman, Esther Stanford Jose. That's Xosei. And she's probably the leading campaigner for reparations in Europe. She's part of an organization called the Pan-African Reparations Coalition of Europe. And one of the things she points out is that when we're talking about reparations requires repair, right? Reparation and repair have the same root. And there's internal reparations and external reparations. So external reparations could be like, you know, financial transactions or monies that are owed from the labor that was exploited and unpaid for during slavery and so forth. But internal reparations is like the repairs that we have to do within the community, right? And I read these situations as examples of unhealed trauma, unhealed hurt. One of the people that Esther put me up on was Chinwezu, the Nigerian scholar, who I'll just share a quote from, because this really blew my mind about redefining and reconceptualizing what it means to think of reparations as a repair process. He says, quote, "Money is not 1% of what reparation is about. Reparation is about mostly about making repairs, self-made repairs on ourselves, mental repairs, psychological repairs, cultural repairs, organizational repairs, social repairs, institutional repairs, technological repairs, economic repairs, political repairs, educational repairs, repairs of every type that we need in order to recreate sustainable Black communities," unquote. And so I think when we expand the frame of reparations beyond just money, right, beyond just getting a payout from banks or the government or whoever, which is important, right, which is part of the repair that needs to be done, right? There was economic damage done, and that economic damage needs repair. Don't get me wrong. But if you give everybody a check and we're still in a capitalist system, are we actually repairing the damage done on all these other levels? Or are we just putting a Band-Aid on something that is actually a much larger wound, a much larger unhealed trauma? And so when I see people reacting to you like this, Renee, and I've had this experience as well with an FBA type of person here in Memphis a couple months ago, that sense that they're just lashing out, right? That they're just being nasty. That to me is often a signal of unhealed hurt, right? Unhealed wounds, unhealed trauma. And I think when we start to think about reparations as trauma healing, it changes the way we think about where we need to place our energy, or at least it broadens our sense of what we're even talking about if we're serious about repairing the damage done by slavery, Jim Crow, neocolonialism, and all the rest of it.
I appreciate that. And it's and there is a lot about this that is really, you know, Geechee, what you read about the whole ego thing is really, I think, like fascinating, right? Right? Because I am part of the problem is like I am the person who I don't really have any desire to be in the forefront of anything, right? Like even like I joke all the time about this show and how this was not on like my life bingo card and this was not the plan at all, and how like convenient not being on camera has actually turned out to be because I don't have to be like a face on a thing. And even as we're like organizing events, oftentimes I'm like, no, you go do it, right? Like we did the book event with Kahinde, and I was like, someone else do the interview, someone else do the intro, someone else do the conversation. Like, I just want to go and like enjoy like learning, right? And I'm not, you know, we did the backpacks the other day and somebody put the camera on me and they were like, talk about the organization. And I was like, Josh, pointed at him, like, y'all talk to him about the organization. Like, I want to be free, right? And I want my people to be free. And I want everybody to be free. And I don't think I need to be in the forefront in order for that to happen. So I always have, like, it's a tricky dynamic because I'm not interested in myself, right? Like the whole point of all of what I do is because I feel like we all have to collectively get to a space where we are not bogged down by all the things that are holding us back. And the whole ego thing, in my opinion, is, you know, it's attached to this whole exceptionalism and this American thing that people do. And like, you know, and then you start getting into really like, it's all selfishness, like capitalism. It's all like, I want to have this thing. I want my bag. I want, like, you know, and all these things all feed into why you have so many people who don't have, because there are all these people who are eating up all the resources. You know what I'm saying? And so,
but I think that this is something that resonates loudly in Brian's book and in Harrison's life. And Brian touched on it in a moment ago when raising the question about are people serious about wanting to be free? And I think this is a major issue, that whether it's the reverse hashtag community that for all intents and purposes, or all that is can be assessed, is not itself coming out of an existing politically organized effort. So its goals are not as aligned with liberation politics. But then there's, you know, and then similarly, I think even more broadly within activist spaces, there remains an issue over what are people's actual goals. I mean, I've even seen or heard over the years an abuse of the phrase "out-organize them" to be used as a popularity contest against other Black organizers. As, you know, because at some points it seems as though certain people and elements within activist spaces are more interested in their own immediate nominal victory or self-promotion, or you know, some small victory for their clique, as opposed to some broader victory that might require sublimating their own personal name and other forms of interests, you know, in favor of a broader collective and radical effort. So now the reality is, I think the only solution is that those of us who have a different approach or view, we have to be better at building our networks and our own organizations and our own support apparatus. But that question though, and again, just to shout out, Brian, what you've done with this book and Harrison's life as an exemplar of this. You know, Harrison and others seem to constantly be in some sort of struggle within the struggle as they try to find a way to actual victory, as opposed to, again, these smaller individual or clique-based, we won this and I won that and I'm outdoing you, as opposed to where does that actually leave in the rest of us? So yeah, anyway, I as some sort of effort as a segue, that I offer that, but yeah, I was just thinking about that and preparing for today, and then in listening to Renee talk about this most recent experience, and just thinking about a quick review of my own personal experience in these movement spaces. Like it can get a little wild. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but just maybe if I could put a question on it for you, Brian, as we were talking, I know a lot of the point for today was to come back and talk more about Harrison's engagement with socialism, and this struggle between race first, class first. Geechee has sent some very compelling quotes and in our private chats around this, coming from your book, that is, to sort of center some of this. But maybe just again to get us sort of headed in that direction, if you were to be asked to summarize Harrison's path, so to speak, or his engagement with race versus class first, what is your sort of elevator summary pitch for that?
Well, I think Harrison got to see both sides of the spectrum, and not just got to see, but got to contribute to the formation of both sides of that spectrum, race first versus class first. And he did so at a time when this debate really first emerges in such explicit terms, which is why it's so instructive to revisit that moment, right? And in other words, as Perry would say, Harrison was the most race conscious of the class radicals in the Socialist Party and the most class conscious of the race radicals in the Garvey movement. I think there's more to the story than that, because Harrison was also a free thinker and a free lover, and had his own sort of a radical internationalist. But I think what he learned at first, he took the Socialist Party at their word when they said they were class first and wanted to emancipate the working class. But the problem was, because it was a majority white party that was not willing to address racial questions, that meant that it wasn't willing to address, the most proletarian element in the country, namely African American communities. And so, he saw these white radicals who, on the one hand, are calling for the overthrow of capitalism and calling for, the people like Eugene Debs, saying that we demand the society be in control of the people and the means of production be in control of the workers. That's a revolutionary program on some level. But then at the same time, they said they had nothing special to offer the Negro, nothing special to say about lynching and segregation and anti-Black pogroms and massacres, and entire African-American towns being deliberately submerged underwater. Nothing special to offer about that, So that, I think, showed Harrison that these so-called class first socialists were not actually class first. They were race first, that is, white race first socialists. They put the white race first and considerations of class for Black workers afterwards. So he leaves the Socialist Party, right? He founds the Liberty League, which, among other things, catalyzes the rise of Garvey and Garveyism as a global international pan-Africanist organization, the UNIA. And then he sees the other end of the spectrum, right? He saw the worst end of the class first spectrum, but now he's going to see the worst end of the race first spectrum, which is Garvey's HNIC, right? Trying to become the provisional president of Africa, envisioning a Black empire over which the sun would never set. The whole authoritarian sort of ethos of Garvey, right? Being the emperor of his fiefdom. That is, in other words, a race-first politics without any class consciousness, without any class analysis, without any, understanding of the folly and pitfalls of Black elite, Black neo-colonial imperial mentalities, which leave behind Black workers just like the Socialist Party did, but for different reason, right? So that's why Harrison is a tricky figure, and partly why he has been so marginalized and almost erased from popular memory, is that the socialists, even though he made groundbreaking contributions from a Black perspective to socialism, essentially secularized the Black socialist tradition, or founded what we might think of as the Black Marxist tradition. They didn't want to remember him because he had these critiques, right? Meanwhile, Garvey and Garveyites, he played a key role with the Liberty League in helping Garvey, training Garvey in race first and in, a mass movement orientation and an internationalist politics, supporting colonized peoples all over the world. But because he had these critiques of Garvey, they didn't want to remember him either. So he gets written out of the origin story, both of the Black socialist tradition, but also the Garveyist, the Garvey movement tradition.
And so this was one of the things in reading your book that it's gonna like live in my head forever, like pointing out that when white people talk about class first, they're literally putting their whiteness first also. Yes. And yes. I was like, what a profound way, what a profound way to explain this to people so that they understand that no one ignores race, not even white people. Like no one ignores race.
Right.
And so my constant battle in all things has always been trying to get people to understand that I struggle with putting race first because I just don't see how you untether them. Like, I don't know how you unweave those two things, because they play together at all times in order to oppress all people. And so, somebody said it in the chat, like the yin and yang, and people are like, which one plays a bigger role? And I never understood the argument, because I've never understood how you separate the two in order to determine which one you battle first. Like, how do you do it? Go ahead, Geechee.
Well, I think this, one of the first conferences we talked about, Baba Dennis Assar and Baba Imhotep in Baltimore. One of the first race first conferences they came on the platform that me and Asafo had, and we was kind of telling them like, our study group is gonna push y'all a little bit. Like, it's you're not just gonna get like, oh, this is a conference. And in that conversation, I feel like we kind of discovered, like, if you even say race first, it would insinuate that something else is second or something else is next or whatever. And I feel like sometimes people get lodged into the race first rhetoric, and it's like they argue that class is not even nowhere in the conversation, even though, we don't really know what they believe is next after race, right? So once the race alignment. So I just feel like that. And again, I think with chapter 8, not only like the argument of, race first, class and these things, but I just think the battle within organizations and kind of what Jared was saying earlier is like the I guess ego or whatever you want to call it. I just find so much value, and I know Jared was joking, but bro, I marked up your whole damn chapter on 8. Like I just like that.
Just underline the whole chapter.
Geechee needed a highlighter intervention.
I saw it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I just think that chapter, if we, talking about serious, I think we just all need to just deal with that chapter for a while and do some study groups, curriculums, or whatever we got to do, because I just think there's a lot there, not only with the again the race and the class, but just like how are we building these orgs, be it mass. I'm not sure that most of us are even focused on party, but be it mass, like how are we building these orgs, and then what are we recreating from the 1920s? So
yeah, I mean, just to get to back to Renee's question of like how to put these things together. Part of the challenge is that class first is not people mean different things when they say that, and you have to first understand, well, what is this person saying when they say class first, right? Because some people who say class first, they genuinely mean like the working class. We need to take considerations of working people very, very seriously and center on that. But others think that's what they're saying, when actually they're perpetuating a white version of that concept, which erases the Black working class from the picture. In other words, some people talk about, some people try to critique white Marxists as class reductionist, right? Reducing everything to class. And I see it a little bit differently. I see them oftentimes doing what I call class obstructionism. They're obstructing a clear view of class by their erasure and marginalization of black workers. Because as Harrison tried and failed to convince them, Black communities are the most thoroughly proletarian element in the country, and the most thoroughly exploited segment of the working class, right? So if your class first politics ignores them, you're actually obstructing a clear view of class. And so how do you put these things together, race and class? I think, Harrison is one great example, and we have to study him, but there's others. Look at C.L.R. James and the Black Jacobins. He starts his analysis in that book with the Black worker in Haiti, right? Look at W.E.B. Du Bois in Black Reconstruction. He starts the whole analysis with the Black worker, right? And then he builds it out from there. Unfortunately, the Marxist tradition has not generally placed the Black worker at the center of the analysis. I mean, Marx in Volume 1 of Capital says a fraction about the figure of the slave compared to the industrial worker in Europe, right? So one of the questions I raised at a conference a couple of years ago was what is the anti-Blackness of the Marxist tradition, particularly the white Western or European Marxist tradition, tell us about the problems with not having any racial analysis whatsoever. Again, I think Black Marxists have done much better. I mentioned C.L.R. James, Du Bois, but it's a slippery question, and it needs care, it needs intention, right? Because again, as we've discussed, race first politics too often does not place the needs or concerns of Black workers first, but often Black bourgeois or petty bourgeois or upwardly mobile, upwardly aspiring Black folks first, which is why, for example, in 1920, Black socialists like Frank Crosswaith, this is from page 181 of my book, responding to Garvey's aspiration to build a Black empire based on capital accumulation, said, quote, "With Africa as our empire, there will still be ragged, underfed, and poverty-stricken Negroes. All that we will have done will be to have exchanged our white parasites and profiteers for Black parasites and Black profiteers." And that's unfortunately quite prophetic for 1920, because that's exactly what happened, in the aftermath of all these anti-colonial liberation struggles on the continent and in the Caribbean and elsewhere. We replaced white colonizers with Black neo-colonizers. And people like George Padmore, for example, who started out in the Communist Party building a Black sort of communist politic, after the betrayals of Stalinism, he becomes anti-communist, right? And he essentially eschews class consciousness in favor of a kind of pan-Africanism that downplays that. And so I think that is the trick, is that because white folks own most things, including the canonization of the Marxist tradition, we are often throwing out the baby with the bathwater when we have a negative experience in white leftist organizations. That is, we're throwing out class consciousness, class analysis, class radicalism as we leave those organizations, right? And that's very dangerous, because again, it'll lead to the kind of class unconsciousness that produces neo-colonial politics, which leave Black workers behind, right? Even if they do empower a small elite of Black, millionaires or billionaires, as in the case of South Africa, for example. And so, yeah, I think it's an easy question, Renee, how to put these things together, but we have the kind of models and examples, and we really just have to sit with them and sit hard with them and call out the white left when it does what it does, right? And call out the class unconscious Black nationalists when they do what they do, because that's the only way that we can hope to forge a space for the Black working class, which again is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with these giant pillars of sort of historical and political traditions that too often sort of use the Black working class to advance their own agendas, whether it's a white socialist agenda that excludes and ultimately does not reckon with Black liberation, or the kind of, class unconscious Black nationalism that uses Black workers to empower a small elite of Black capitalists or neo-colonizers.
Well, Brian, you're gonna put yourself in the crosshairs because you and Jarrett, y'all just be quoting people books, but Killer Mike is living it. y'all quote people books where he can't do, but he's doing it. Hey, so really quickly, so I wonder if you looked into William Ferris. I know you talked a little bit about him in chapter 8. He also left Garvey. And because somebody in the chat said, is there a way to, sorry, I highlighted, but I think it's going out. Is it? Yeah, see, like Harrison's critique of Domingo and Randolph, and see if that could be relevant or inclusive of people's organizing today. But I'm wondering if we look at Amy Ashwood Garvey, Harrison's work, and then William Ferris and whoever else to kind of shape how to and how not to build organizations. So in this book, you can see about Garvey's like governance and accountability issues in terms of people trying to hold him accountable, push him a particular way. His inability to retain really good members, solid people that actually can help the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the way that Garvey used different cliques and different mechanisms to kind of use people to shield itself from critique. And then, but even I think it was pretty dope that, and I said this to Renee and Jarrett, like he did a review crew type critique. He critiqued Garvey using Emperor Jones in a way where he never mentioned Garvey's name, but he critiqued them in his own newspaper. So it's like, I'm just curious if you think that some of these people could be engaged to like give us a better blueprint of how not to recreate authoritarian ruling type cult personality leaderships or organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've shared before on this show is the Ella Baker quote about how we need group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. But I think the other thing that I would mention here is the radical humility, right? I talk in the book about Harrison's radical humility, which is a perfect antidote to the egotism, right? That causes people not to be able to hear or receive criticism in ways that would make them stronger, right? I mean, imagine if the Socialist Party of Harrison's day could have heard his critique and received it, and actually not aborted the Colored Socialist Club that Harrison founded in Harlem to bring Black workers and organizers into the party, right? What if they had leaned into that and not only retained Harrison's membership in the party, but all the people that Harrison was about to recruit, right? The Richard B. Moores and Grace Campbells and Wilfred Domingos and Cyril Briggses of the world. I mean, the Socialist Party would have been a much more effective organization, right? It was to its detriment that it could not retain the membership of Harrison or A. Philip Randolph or Chandler Owen or Cyril Briggs or Grace Campbell or any of these other folks, right? That weakened the organization. If it had had more of a politics of radical humility, particularly the white socialists, having some humility in the face of Black socialists and Black workers, it would have been a much stronger and more effective organization. And same for Garvey, right? There's a quote from Ferris. You mentioned William Ferris. On page 280, I write how even Garvey loyalists like William Ferris could lament how Garvey lost brilliant scholars, writers, orators, preachers, and lawyers because he wouldn't listen to their ideas or criticisms. In other words, imagine how much stronger the Garvey movement could have been had it retained Hubert Harrison, had it retained Richard B. Moore, had it retained Amy Ashwood Garvey, had it retained, like there's all these people that came and left the Garvey movement, just like there's all these Black radicals that came and left the socialist and communist parties. Both of them would have been stronger organizations had they had some radical humility at the top, right? In the leadership in particular. But too often we have leaders or a leadership structure or mentality that either cannot or will not hear criticism and understand that it's going to get stronger if it receives that criticism and incorporates it, versus just getting defensive and egotistical and polemical and going to war about these things, right? It's the same with the FBA individual that Renee's talking about. Inability to receive criticism or hear new ideas or incorporate. So that's why I really stress in this book, Harrison's radical humility, because it's such a beautiful answer to the egotism that is so just widespread in our organizations, no matter how progressive or radical or revolutionary, right? That egotism, like we need a politic about that. We need actually an intentional way of addressing that and thinking deeply, both for ourselves as individuals, but for the organizations and for the movements that we're involved in, to make sure that we check that, because at the end of the day, it's actually holding us back, right? The egotism of the white socialists held back the effectiveness of their organization. The egotism of Garvey held back the effectiveness of that movement.
So, and my question, and this is part of one of the things that I struggle with is, so does Hubert Harrison bear any responsibility for seeding the space? Because he left, right? There's a conversation also to be had about when things happen in a space that require pushback, require fight, require demand of, you need to check yourself, that people will often cede the space and go find somewhere else to organize, because who wants to deal with other people's bullshit, right? And so I question sometimes, like, is there a responsibility when you're in a space and you see things happening to say, like, I'm not leaving because you're full of shit and you're gonna run this organization into the ground if we don't fix what's going on in this space right now with you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer.
Well, that's a good question. First, I will say that, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's two levels to answer that I would, or at least two responses I would have to that question. There's sort of an individual level, and then there's a historical level response. At an individual level, Harrison certainly worked hard to try and change the Socialist Party, to get them, to change their ways. He wrote a series-length, exposition about the Negro and socialism, drawing out in a historical materialist framework the relationship between race and class, why Black people were the most proletarian element in the country, and why it was the duty of the Socialist Party to champion their cause. He founded the Colored Socialist Club in Harlem, right, to try and recruit and retain Black members. He did all these things, but they couldn't hear it, and so at some point he left. Now that's the individual thing. He did what he could, and he could tolerate only so much. But then there's a historical response, which is, okay, what about the next generation of Black socialists? What was the experience of A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen and Grace Campbell in the party? They walked the same path. They set up the Messenger magazine, the Emancipator. They were talking about Black workers, a Black angle of vision on socialism, and bringing socialism to Black communities. Ultimately, the party could not retain their membership either, right? And then we can go to the next iteration, the Communist Party. The Communist Party did what it could with Black, for a moment, especially in the 1930s with the Scottsboro Boys and Angelo Herndon. And, there's a whole period where the Communist Party is actually trying its best, at least, to do right by Black workers and actually, taking some serious steps internally as a party. They even waged a campaign against what they called white chauvinism within the party. But, with the onset of World War II, Stalinism makes these pacts with Hitler, right? And basically betrays and abandons the anti-colonial struggle and the anti-racist struggle kind of as a consequence of that. And so over time, historically, it's like, how much can we give the white left? The reason why I don't organize oftentimes in white left spaces is because I'm like, look, we've been trying to tell y'all this for a century, at least a century now, since Harrison's time. And so at some point, y'all have to learn how to listen. Y'all have to learn how to hear this message that we've been giving you for over 100 years. Same with the Garvey movement. Harrison did all that he could. He didn't just leave the Garvey movement as at the first sign of, a weakness or limitation on the part of Marcus Garvey. He tried his best to push the Garvey movement in an anti-imperialist direction, right? He writes about the Colored International and how capitalist imperialism is the enemy we must combine to fight, as against Garvey's dreams of a black empire over which the sun would never set. And he's writing this in the Negro World, right? Which is Garvey's paper. He tries to make the Garvey movement more class conscious. He organizes a meeting of the Black Reds in Harlem. Cyril Briggs, Grace Campbell, Claude McKay. They have this whole meeting, and then they roll up on the second UNIA International Convention in 1921 and try to promote class consciousness within the Garvey movement. Garvey has them summarily expelled. It's not a question of, oh yeah, let's talk about this. Let's see if we can deepen the struggle. Let's see if we can bring in a whole chunk of Black Reds into the UNIA and thereby strengthen it and thereby make it even more. No, this is Garvey's fiefdom. It's his way or the highway. And so if you're not on board, you're out. And that's what happens, right? And so it's not just Harrison, in other words, who has a right, like any of us as individuals, to devote as much or as little time to an organization as we can or as we desire to. It's also about these longer historical trends of like, what about the other folks who are trying to do the same thing, oftentimes after Harrison has already tried to do this? And do they succeed or fail, right? And are they able to even move the needle at all? And so I think, regardless of whether we think Harrison ceded the space too early after trying to push the Garvey movement in a class conscious and anti-imperialist and also party building direction, by the way, right? He founds the Liberty Party as one of the only all Black political parties in history to try to push the Garvey movement towards party building. Regardless of where we come down on whether he did too much or too little to try to reform and change the organization from within, there's also these larger sort of historical patterns and other folks who often tried to do the same thing and fail. And I think, again, it's like, to me, it all comes back to, we have to be much more conscious and sensitive to the egotism that hampers a lot of these efforts. A lot of times we want to be in the spotlight or we want to get attention. And it's like that may or may not actually be the most effective thing for the movement, for the struggle, right? Even some of the interpersonal stuff that we get into within our movements, right? We may have had an issue with somebody a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and we're not talking to them anymore. That holds back our movement, whether we like it or not. That holds back our ability to unite.
You just described poor Jared's whole life.
listen, I was about to throw the alley-oop to Jared. I was going to say, listen, Jared, I'm going to read this little passage and I need you to respond.
Wait, but before you do, I just want to, so that was a little bit of a gotcha question, and I just want to admit it, that I know that he was expelled, but I wanted us to wrestle with this idea of ceding space, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a big one. And part of the issue, as you said, when you talk about like white socialists, and we've been telling the whole thing, like I've been having this fight for years about this fucking like this horseshoe theory thing that people love to throw out there about like the extreme right being closer to us than people in the middle, like this whole nonsensical idea that like, you can share space with people who are racist if you all agree that like there shouldn't be World War III. So I wanted to make sure it was clear that it was, I wanted us to wrestle. I wanted you specifically to speak on wrestling with that idea. So thank you, because you did it as brilliantly as I expected you to. So I appreciate it. But Geechee, you had a thought.
So really quick, I hear the tactical maneuvering with people. outside of your organization is logical. Like you don't like, yeah, we agree on this one thing, but like when you have to do that in your organization, it's a whole different ball game. But so Jared, I'm curious your thoughts because I know you mentioned being organizing within organization, and then there's this one passage, and I'm only going to read the short bit of it, but again, I marked up the whole passage. Harrison's assessment of Garvey, all the way to at the bottom of chapter 8. In the same diary entry, Harrison then proceeded to articulate his general estimate of Mr. Garvey's character and abilities. His first problem was Garvey's excessive egotism. After recounting how he had given Garvey a platform at the historic Liberty League inauguration in 1917, subsequently encouraged his audience to attend Garvey's speeches, Harrison lamented how Garvey refused to return the favor once he began achieving fame and political fortune of his own. Then the UNIA members would ask Garvey to call Harrison and make use of his ideas and abilities. Garvey would say that Harrison had his own propaganda and was dangerous, even though Harrison's main message at the time was race first. Harrison concluded that the first big defeat then is Mr. Garvey's makeup is a defeat in the size of his soul. He is spiritually as well as intellectually a little man. That's crazy. That is why he doesn't want anyone around him who are larger than Gert either way. Harrison felt that when Garvey did find someone in his organization who loomed larger, he does not utilize them in a way which would aid, amplify, or modify his chaotic plans and notions. So, I mean, it keeps going. It's just bars after bars. But, like, I'm just curious how you grapple with Renee's question and when not to concede.
I don't know. And I admit, I've been just to be very brief. As I've been rereading Brian's book and thinking about that very question and going through my own sort of post midlife crisis and examining where I am and where I fit in all of this, and going over my endless amounts of errors. I don't really know. I mean, I don't know exactly what to do. I feel like I've watched. I've complained to you all off the air about the sort of feudalist approach, like everybody wants their fiefdoms rather. That folks, to Renee's question, would it seems any sign of disagreement, folks would rather set up their own operation and work in competition with others doing similar work. And then even as they're doing similar work that others have done or been doing or are doing, they rebrand what they're doing as something novel and new to boost their own fiefdom and their own support network. I've also seen, I'm struggling with this whole thing where criticism is raised, and it just ultimately ends up in the removal or the marginalization of the critic, as opposed to anyone actually engaging the criticism. So I don't know. I really don't. I'm just, personally, struggling with this and not knowing really how to address it, and having to just conclude that my preferred approaches are just not, and my involvement or my personal delivery is just not as effective as I would have hoped. So I really don't know. And even in rereading that chapter, the tendency is, for me, is to fall into some bias. And it's like, then I start reading it and I'm like, well, I'm Team Harrison. But then to Renee's question, what are we doing here? Why would I want to get involved in picking a side and picking a team when, to Dr. Clark's previous point, pan-Africanism or perish, and we would be better off if we had followed Booker T, Du Bois, and Garvey. But at the same time, Clark had his own beefs. He had his own overt beefs, calling people out, calling Molefe Asante, saying that, call him out his name, saying Karenga is an academic vaudeville show. He called the man an academic vaudeville show on a panel at a conference. And at the time, I'm like, yeah, get him, Doc. But then I'm also in the context of this question, like, I don't know. So I don't know. And then, of course, I'm off my own willingness to be overtly critical of others. So I really don't know. That's really what I'm saying. I really don't know. And I'm just acknowledging some personal struggles with this.
Well, I appreciate that, Jared, because I think that, that's a beautiful example of self-awareness and vulnerability, to acknowledge that, hey, I don't know how to solve this problem. Oftentimes, I think the more egotistical among us would say, oh, I know exactly, there's like this unwillingness to admit, when we're limited, or when we've reached the limit of our knowledge or of our understanding. So I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's a good first step toward getting to know, right? If you want to learn more, you got to acknowledge that you have more to learn, rather than just pretending like you got nothing to learn, no way to grow. Another side of this question that I want to throw in the mix, from Harrison, and this is from page 9 of my book, The Introduction, is getting right this politics versus personality question, right? And so I'm just gonna share a quote or a passage from my book, which I think speaks to this, right? So here it goes. While his fearlessness in voicing criticisms surely stung those who otherwise might have kept his memory alive, Harrison didn't make it a personal matter. In fact, he took issue with those who did not make a distinction between personal relationships and political ideas. Regarding people like this, he regretted how, quote, if you oppose them in politics, they make a personal matter of it. Either you must always hold the same political views as they, or you must become their personal enemies. The only other alternative is to keep your mouth shut as a point of politeness so far as these real differences are concerned, unquote. This latter point speaks to the still common practice of keeping politics away from the dinner table and from polite and respectable conversations. By contrast, quote, we ourselves developed under quite different conditions, recalled Harrison. In the days of our apprenticeship at the old St. Benedict's Catholic and St. Mark's AME Church Lyceums, the fiercest opposition in debate could not take from the cordiality of personal friendship. And this is the manner we propose to take with us into public life, and which I hope I took into the book, right? Which is that, we need to develop the maturity, the sophistication, the intentionality to be able to have bitter political disagreements without making it a personal matter. Right? I mean, that is something that is not easy to do, right? Because it's a lot easier to just deduce personal issues from political differences, or to conflate the two, to collapse the two, to say, oh, because I disagree with this person, politically, we are now personal enemies. And I think that's a very kind of juvenile, almost like elementary school playground way of doing politics. Like, if we're serious about social transformation, revolution, radical social change, whatever, we have to learn how to make that distinction and understand that we can have all the political differences we want or need and not let that undermine the personal relationships, right? The comradeship, the friendship, in many cases, that we have established, right? Because I don't know Jared's history as well as Jared or maybe some of the other folks here, but I know in my own experience, I have suffered the loss of friendships, the loss of comradeships because of political differences at times, right? And I regret that, and I would hope that I have the maturity, the self-awareness, and the vulnerability to be able to acknowledge that, right? Or as Jared does, to acknowledge when I don't know maybe how to move forward in a good way with some of the individuals that I may have wronged or that I may have mistreated in my personal experience, in my life experience, my political experience. But I think that's a good starting point, right? Is to say, look, we need to keep our eye on the prize. We need to look at the bigger picture. And so whatever personal issues are here, we need to repair those, or we can repair those. Hopefully we can heal some of those, but also going forward, let's not personalize political differences so much. And let's actually practice and develop a practice where we can have political differences without personalizing them.
You know, I think, and people said this a couple of times, Safia Bakari and Asada writes on it as well. I think it's at this point, I'm not sure that I'm or either or no one is clear on what is personal and what's political. Because like even then you see that these organizations, they didn't have a container for actual ideological struggle. And today we still don't have any containers. So hell, I don't know. Maybe there's a grounding of figuring out how to clarify what is personal, what is political. And then also like, if this thing is supposed to be scientific, like should you be able to make an argument on what you believe so that other people can be clear what you believe, or what is your ideology? I feel like I think, I don't know. It feels like this, and I know you talked about the mass org and how in Trinidad they were struggling around worker issues in the Garvey movement, and so that didn't look like the same thing in Harlem and then down south. And so yeah, I don't know if, Jared talked about his methodology. I don't know if the methodology is to grow mass and then whoever get it right first and everybody run and copy that, as opposed to like have some type of structural effort going towards a way. And then even with Hubert suggesting or organizing party, people got killed. Like people who disagree and had different methodologies, there were real conflict. So I don't know. I just think this it's really hard to distinguish with the personal between the political. As as Safia said, like some of these things merge in their self, and either personal becomes political or vice versa. So yeah, I'm thinking around that conversation.
I couldn't find my mic. Yo. So on top of all of this struggle, and we're gonna run out of time again. So this just means like Brian's never gonna be rid of me, because we're just gonna always be like, Brian, when you coming back?
Well, we have been talking about him coming up on shows more often. So maybe.
There you go, acting like Camus. There you go. There you go. Look.
Put me in, coach. I'm ready. Put me in the game.
We're gonna figure it out, because I feel like there's a lot to struggle around this, and part of the other thing that I was thinking about as I was having this internal conversation about like seating space and everything was also, in the end, Hubert he was removed, right? So in the end, all of his effort to kind of fight within the Socialist Party, to fight within the Garveyites, to fight with, like, in the end, he literally got removed from the historical narrative, right? Like, if I hadn't read your book, I don't think I would have understood 98% of what Hubert Harrison had to do with the Black radical tradition, with none of this, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't the first time I had read his name, because the last time you went, I told you, like, it was when I saw it, I was like, this name is familiar, and then I remembered that I read about him in Sharice's book, right? And so, but even like his pointing out the Harlem Renaissance, that this was all like trickery, right? Like all these things, like that he's written out of the historical context of the Garvey movement, right? And all that came from that, which was part of his own, teaching of his ideology and being a mentor to Marcus Garvey. Like, none of these things are part of the historical narrative. So there's also some consideration to the after effect of being the person who doesn't hesitate to push back, right? Like, it can result in you just being completely removed from the record until somebody like Brian Kwoba is like, wait a minute, we got to write a book and explain like what all of this, what happened. And so I think about often like the struggles that we have with other personalities. And look, I'm not necessarily like Jared level petty, but I got some petty in me, because I just don't have, have the energy or the patience for other people's bullshit. Like I just don't have the energy for it, right? And so this is my own flaw that I'm fully like aware and and clear on. And I have realized that a lot of my problems with other people, like it's definitely me, right? Like I feel a certain level of clarity about something, and I don't want to argue with people who I know we're just not going to get to a place of agreement, right? Like I'm clear on my stance on a thing because I've researched it. I've done all the stuff that I need to do to have clarity. So if you're going to argue with me about the thing that I literally researched and I figured out, right? And I have a fact-based understanding of why I believe something to be what I believe, I don't want to argue with you about it. Right? Like I don't want to do it. I just don't, and it's a flaw of mine, right? Which I'm fully aware of. And I just don't know if I can undo it at this point. I'm 49. It might be a little too late to change that. But can we talk a little bit about like how in the end this impacted the historical record on Harrison? Because that's a big, to me, this is problematic. Like it is problematic that people don't know who Hubert Harrison is. This is a problem for me. And I feel like this is what continuously happens to people who struggle within the movement to try and get the movement to move forward in what I think is a more principled and a better way, right? Like can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I once again, I have to say, like I said to Jared, thank you for acknowledging that, that some of this petty stuff is on you. And it's like, we all have our warts and our flaws and our spots and our wrinkles, right? Like, I think that's a good starting point. And obviously there are times when you just need to dip. Like you don't have to like try to convince somebody that is either not willing or not able to actually listen to hear what you have to say, let alone incorporate it into their thinking or their practice. So I'm not saying we should just stick with anyone and everyone on principle, right? Obviously there are moments where our energy is wasted trying to convince somebody, or our energy would be better spent talking to other folks who are more open to what we have to say. But the other thing I want to say about your concern that Harrison was essentially written out of history and marginalized in sort of popular awareness, but there's a couple things to say to that. Like one is, I think part of the reason for that is his own sort of failure to convince or failure to make the sort of shifts in some of these organizations that he was trying, whether it was with the socialists or the Garveyites or whatever else it might have been. But the other thing is, like, we're not here for accolades in history, like we just like we shouldn't be here to get accolades in the present or like for egotistical sort of self-aggrandizing reasons. We don't need to be the center of attention. That's not why we're here. We're also not here to be the center of attention in history. And I think the best way to avoid historical marginalization of the kind that Harrison and many others experienced, right? I mean, there's a lot of Black radicals who have been disremembered, discarded, marginalized. The best way for us to avoid that is to win, right? I mean, the people who won, at least temporarily, Garvey won on some level temporarily. Kwame Nkrumah won. The people who reached some level of state power or notoriety, like the best thing we can do is win, as what I'm trying to say, right? And we have to recognize that ego often blocks us from winning in the present because it exacerbates all these like personalistic and sort of petty differences that we might have between each other. If we could actually build the kind of movements and organizations, that could be more successful, that's the best hedge against being marginalized in history. I think part of what's sad about Harrison's story is his failure to convince the Socialist Party to move in a different direction, his failure to convince the Garvey movement move in a different direction, right? His failure to do some of the things he was trying to do, which was partially maybe his fault, but also partially the fault of whoever else he was working with. I mean, you know, I think we have a lot to learn from the history, but we shouldn't be chasing after it, like in the sense of like, oh, you know, I want to make sure I get remembered in history. Like the best way to do that is do something valuable, meaningful, influential now, right? That's the best way to get memorialized in history, if that's the goal. But I don't think that's really what we should be here for. You know, I think we should really be working to win without any credit, right? Like plan on not getting credit for what we do, because I think a lot of our heroes in history still don't have the credit that is due to them, right? Still haven't been recognized in the ways that we might hope that they would be recognized.
So, but how you know, given that I had a chance to you know, feebly try to answer this question, how would you argue Harrison tried to address this issue? That is, knowing when to leave, when to stay, how to best make his mark, and where was he at the end of his life? Where was he?
Yeah, well, he was at the end of his life. You know, his last major organizational project was the International Colored Unity League, which he founded in 1924. And you know, what's interesting about the ICUL is that it incorporated a lot of different elements from his past experience. So it very much was geared for a kind of Black unity, sort of, you know, social movement orientation, like the Liberty League had been, combining Africans and African Caribbeans and continental Africans and African Americans all in the same organization. It had a program of demanding a separate state for Black people, what I call a territorial resolution of the land question for African Americans, which I think is something he kind of took from the Garvey movement, right? This idea of sovereignty, this idea of the Black nationality, and actually needing a territorial resolution of the lack of sovereignty due to landlessness that African Americans have been experiencing ever since, you know, 40 Acres and a Mule was aborted after the Civil War. He was willing to work with the church, with the Black church, right? I mean, that's something that might be shocking to those of us who are most familiar with Harrison as a free thinker, right? And as somebody who was, as John G. Jackson put it, belligerently anti-Christian, right? Very critical of the church, very critical of religion. In 1924, Harrison's International Colored Unity League program said that the Black church has done more for the education and spiritual uplift of the masses than any other agency in the race. And he was actually encouraging people who had outgrown the sort of orthodox fundamentalist type churches, but who still wanted a religious home. He said they're invited to join the Harlem Community Church. This was the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Reverend Ethelred Brown, who, after Harrison died, renames the Harlem Community Church the Hubert Harrison Memorial Church, right? Speaking to the kind of spiritual transformation that Harrison underwent and the sort of power that he carried spiritually in Harlem, even though he was, you know, very much a free thinker and critical of religion. So Harrison, you know, he incorporates these different elements that I think kind of in a sense are like his last testament, his last will and testament, so to speak, in terms of all the elements that he was talking about: cooperative Black-owned businesses. He was talking about working with, you know, Black churches and faith-based communities, talking about a separate Black state, you know, talking about Africans, African Americans, and Afro-Caribbeans in the same organization. There's all these different socialist elements, Garveyist elements, you know, Black church elements. There's all these different elements in the mix of this organization. And to me, that reflects the kind of multifaceted and multidimensional nature of Harrison's politics and legacy, right? That he wasn't a one-note Johnny. He wasn't a unidimensional figure. He had all these dimensions, and he tried to integrate them. He tried to synthesize them as best as he could in the International Colored Unity League. And I think it's a great starting point for when we're thinking about how to organize today. For example, just the other night, I was with Geechee in Atlanta at this event at Create ATL, beautiful space, a multi-purpose community space. And, we set up an altar, and we had a whole ancestral libation ceremony calling in ancestors, Hubert Harrison and many, many others, Assata Shakur, Dr. Walter Rodney, because his wife, Dr. Patricia Rodney, graced us with her presence at that event. We started by calling in all the ancestors in a very spiritual, ceremonial fashion. But we're also talking about Black Marxist politics. We're also talking about the Garvey movement and its legacy, right? We're also talking about free love, what it means to have a Black free love politics and a queer positive orientation on Black liberation. I say that because these are elements that are oftentimes not to be found in the same space, right? Most of the time, we're talking about Black Marxism and nothing else. We're talking about, we're doing spiritual, ceremonial, African spirituality, and not talking about anything political, right? And so the point is, like, let's combine all this, let's integrate all this, let's synthesize all of this stuff, because it all has a role to play, and it allows us to tap into different sides of who we are. We all have a spiritual side, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. We all have, a sort of political side and a social side and an intellectual side. And it's like, I think we try to design the event, whether consciously or not, to like tap into all these different facets and dimensions of who we are as individuals, but also as a collective, as a community. Right? Like, you may not be interested in spirituality, but other parts of the community are. And if it matters to them, and if we want to meet them where they're at, we have to speak to that. We have to, we have to acknowledge that on some level. You may not be super political or think of yourself that way, but a lot of other parts of our community are. So if we're not speaking to that, acknowledging that, meeting people there, then we're leaving some folks behind. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if Geechee, if you want to share a little more, but I think that the method, there's a Harrisonian methodology that I think we can learn from, which is like, test what you know and what you're doing against all these other folks who know differently or doing differently, and see if you still stand that test of time. If you still stand strong in what you're doing, then that's a good sign.
No, yeah, I think you summed it up really perfectly. Having multiple different people in the space, including there was a house music event going on, like on the other side, and people would kind of dip back and forth, and so there was a lot of good conversation. And I know we're gonna wrap. I want you to share this, and I know it's gonna be kind of quick and probably unfair, but towards the end, you talked about how Harrison kind of possibly was using his youthful radicalism and doing more or talking more conservative. And I feel like there are some brothers that me and Jared might know who once said that Fred Hampton was young and he would have matured into a Black capitalist or whatever type shit. Like, how can we make sure that that's not what's going to happen with Garvey? with Harrison, when people read that towards the end of his life, given his economic situation and other things, he might have made some decisions that he would even disagree with a couple years ago. So if you can kind of lay that out as we wrap.
Yeah, I mean, there's some indication that Harrison might have grown a little bit more conservative in his 40s than he only lives till 44. So, but yeah, in his 40s than he was in his, let's say, 20s or 30s. But I think part of that is the economic factor, right? He ever since he lost his postal job to the Tuskegee machine, he had trouble finding consistent work, and he often lived off of his street corner speaking. And he did become a lecturer for the New York Board of Education, which gave him some level of income. But he was a great speaker, and so he ends up campaigning for the Democrats in 1924, for example, in the election season of 1924, becomes a stump speaker for the Democrats, even though he knows in his heart that, that party, especially in the Jim Crow era, was the party of segregation, the party of, the white racists in the South. And so I think some of these considerations are just economic. He needs a paycheck. He's got a family of 7 by 1924. He's the main sort of breadwinner for his wife and 5 kids. And so that's, I think, some of it. But I think also some of it is the betrayals that he experienced from the white left, right? There's a moment where he talks as if Rockefeller is actually better for humanity than those pesky Reds, meaning the communists. Which again is kind of a silly thing for someone like him to say, but to me it expresses a certain bitterness of betrayal. Just like when George Padmore leaves, the Communist Party and becomes anti-communist because of the ways that he felt betrayed by the Communist Party and by Moscow. I think part of how we check against that is to actually do some of the healing work I was talking about earlier, right? If we hold on to bitterness, if we hold on to resentment, that can actually distort and corrupt our political outlook because we're emotional beings, right? As much as the white Western patriarchal world tells us that reason is superior to emotion, like, no, emotions contain information. And when we ignore that information, we often ignore, we often set ourselves up for problems later on. And this is why I really, really respect, and I think we need to just honor and cherish the elders who do remain in the struggle, so to speak, right? I mean, we were with Dr. Patricia Rodney the other night. I was also had the pleasure to share space with Baba AK, Dr. Akinyele Umoja, who's just put out a new book on Robert and Mabel Williams, where we were at the book launch last Sunday. And these folks are just amazing, because most people who get old, either they get conservative or they just drop out of politics altogether, right? So when we have some of these elders who are not neither conservative nor dropping out, but are still in the struggle, still doing the good work on the ground, showing up to meetings, showing up to actions, participating in organizations and events, at least. That's a very precious thing, and we got to really honor and celebrate them and ask them, frankly, right? Because they'll have more to say about what it takes to stay in the long-term struggle, right? Being a long-distance runner, they have a lot more wisdom than I would about this issue.
So there's a question in the chat about Harrison and Claude McKay that I'm gonna put a pin in, because Jared has to go at 1, and I have a 2+ hour drive ahead of me, so I also can't stay too long. I also want to introduce the idea that maybe we can get you and Kehinde on at the same time, because I really want to have like a longer conversation about how we organize and the methods that we use to organize, and like, how do we get into this? How do we put ourselves in a space where all the things that a lot of the things we talked about today, the egos, the feelings, the petty, all these things don't end up superseding the work, right? Because I feel like that in the end, that's always like how do we get past all of these things so that we can fight for the thing that I really, like, at my core, I hope all of us actually want, right? Like, for all, don't give me that face, Geechee. I'm gonna make a meme of that look. Like, at the core of it, I would hope, even as mad as dude was at me, right? And for all the things that he came at me with, right? I do honestly think, like, at his core, he wants to be free. He wants to feel like he's not under the boot of the oppression and all the things, right? Now, we may disagree on how we get to that place. We may disagree on whether or not like how I see reparations as like a thing moving forward. Like we may but at the core of it, like I don't think he necessarily wants me to get killed by like a white supremacist, right? Like I don't think that's at the core of what he really thinks is important. And so my question always when we start talking about organizing is like, how do we create the conversations and the spaces where we're actually able to teach people how to get past the propaganda? Because I feel like for me, like that's the biggest thing, right? Like I can't say it enough. The first time I read Jared's book and remembered him talking about how people always say, well, what's the answer? And me really understanding that the answer is you have to kill the propaganda first before you can even address what you do, right? Because if we're not going to the same place because your understanding of what Black capitalism is going to do for the ability to give freedom and liberation to Black people. If we don't agree on that thing, how can we be on the same organizing path towards how we move forward? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there's definitely space here to have a whole list of conversations about how we organize, how we address things. Me and Geechee had talked a long time ago about like trying to come up with like a list of questions. How do we figure out what it is that Black people, like as a general idea of when we talk about electoral politics, what is it that Black people are looking for? Like there's so many things that I feel like never get talked about with regard to actually how we work together towards this thing. And, you know, I'd really love for us to continue that conversation because I think it's so necessary.
Absolutely. I'll just say really briefly, I know we got to quit, but just really briefly, I hear you say, how do we get past all this kind of emotional stuff so we can get to the real fight of, you know, whatever, fight the system. And my thing is like, that's part of the fight. The emotional stuff is part of the fight.
True. If
we can't get over this stuff, if we can't heal some of the stuff, we can't fight. Like this is part of the fight. You see what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
So yeah, that's all. But I would love to have more conversations and more engagements about all this, because I think it's really central and really critical to whether or not we can and how we can move forward and actually do better than anything our forebears in history were able to do.
Dr. Kwoba, Geechee, Renee, thank you all very much once again. And salute, of course, to the undefeated chat. And if folks have fewer, better things to do later today, I'll be back with a Saturday night live at 6 p.m. Eastern here on Black Liberation Media. Have a little bit of fun covering some silly nonsense and hanging out a little bit. So for those of us, as I was called recently, terminally online and other things like that, come on through and hang out. You know, these hating ass kids. I tell you, you know. But
well, thank you for having me back again. This has been a really, really great time, great conversation, and I thank all of you for being a part of it and allowing me to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And Geechee, I got to remember to ping you more. I like you here. This is you bring. You know, you bring a little balance. This is good. I like it. Jared trapped. Anytime I send people emails, I'd be like, Jared can't say no. What do y'all think? What are we gonna do?
What would I say no for? Absolutely. Come, be here on Saturdays, Geechee. What's up?
I would be here with you tonight, Jared, but we got a part 2 of the Push Theater Revolutionary Love play and the shootout. Cherie and Baba Jihad.
That's right. That's Cherie's, right?
Yeah. So, open night was phenomenal, and tonight is day 2. So cool. I would have.
And shout out to Millennials. Today is 8 years that Millennials has been a thing.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
right
So shout
on.
out to millennials, and I just appreciate y'all. And Brian, I'll be in touch because we're gonna have to circle back. You know, we'll give it like a little rest, a few weeks, and then we'll bring you back, and we can keep going.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. We'll see you next time with more
Saturday.
with Renee.